Hi, you're watching Monday Night Live. My name is Brendan Malone, and in this episode, I'm going to be talking to Martyn Iles. Martyn is the Managing Director of the Australian Christian Lobby, one of Australia's largest political movements of more than 170,000 people. Formerly, Martyn has been a business owner, a lawyer, a youth pastor, a debating champion, and a lobbyist. He co-founded the Human Rights Law Alliance, which has defended dozens of Australians who faced legal action simply for living out their faith. Martyn is an advocate for truth in the public square, and he spends time in the nation's parliaments, as well as regularly being featured on the mainstream media, and he also hosts his own alternative media program called The Truth of It. So without any further ado, let's have this important conversation with Martyn about free speech, Christian engagement with the culture, and lots more. Well, Martyn, thank you so much for being on the show. Folks at home, you don't know what a comedy of errors we've just been through to try and get this interview to happen. It's been probably about 45 minutes of trying all sorts of technical fixes, but we're finally here and recording. And Martyn, the irony too is that a lot of my listeners and watchers, and I do stuff similar to you. I speak at conferences around New Zealand and Australia, and wherever I go, people say to me, "Do you know that Martyn Iles fella? You got to have him on your show." So finally, after 45 minutes today, you're on the show. It's great to have you here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, no, Brendan, I'm looking forward to it as well. And we better make the most of it after the last 45 minutes.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Hardware issues.
Well, after this, we'll probably both have a career in tech support, I think, helping people with Zoom and Skype crisis. Martyn, tell us just a little bit about Martyn Iles. Who are you? How did you come to be working at the forefront of many of probably the most controversial and hotly contested issues of our age?
Oh, look, the short answer is I came to doing this job by accident. That's the short answer. But look, I'm from Brisbane in Queensland, Australia. I grew up there, and I'm a lawyer by background. I went to university, studied law. Also did quite a stint in small business. When I was in school, I started a tech business, ran that for a few years before going to study law, and that was quite a lot of fun. Also been in youth ministry as well. But through some surprising twists and turns of events, I found myself working at the Australian Christian Lobby in 2014 as Chief of Staff to the then Managing Director, Lyle Shelton. Was then involved in the starting up of a religious freedom law firm called the Human Rights Law Alliance, which is now being run by a very capable man in John Steenhoff. And I was invited back to be the Managing Director of ACL. So it was all just the twists and turns of life and the providence of God, and prayers answered in unexpected ways. And here I am.
Tell me, the issue of free speech, it's something that you've been at the forefront of, I know, in Australia. How serious do you think are the current threats to free speech, and how important is that battle? Because it seems to me that without freedom to dissent, without any sort of fear of reprisal for just dissenting on various opinions, then we can't really have a functioning civil society.
I think that's right. I think one of the things that's going on right now is that speech is being characterized as something that is incredibly harmful, and that the speaking of ideas that don't fit certain narratives is incredibly harmful. And therefore, the justification arises to punish that speech in ways that are completely disproportionate. What they will say is that speech is so severe, speech is such a nasty thing, that it is literally killing people, that it is literally oppressing people, that it is responsible, the expression of certain ideas is responsible for the oppression of entire segments of our community. And they have struggled against this deadly oppression now for decades or centuries. And so therefore you get this permission structure to say, well, let's wallop anybody who says certain things, who speaks certain ideas that we deem to be oppressive. Let's wallop them really hard with disproportionate punishments. Now, the change here is that once upon a time, speech was fought with speech, right? That was the kind of, you say something, you expect to have stuff said back at you. And it might not always be friendly, it might not always be nice, it might not always be fun, you might sometimes be horribly wrong, and you might be proven to be wrong, but that's okay, because that's called the contest of ideas. You can see the sudden change. You no longer fight speech with speech. You fight speech with more severe methods. And that's why we see the rise of what people are calling cancel culture, where you get people sacked, you get people's accreditations revoked, you get people intimidated and all these kinds of things. Or indeed, you see people, you often see, I don't know what they have in New Zealand, but they're usually called equal opportunity commissions or human rights commissions or something like this, going around and hunting people down who have said the wrong thing or thought the wrong thing and punishing them with fines, with threats of all kinds of further penalties.
To me, I see there's a double whammy here too, and that it's once upon a time there was a rule of law, if you like, even when you were being censured, perhaps for, I don't know, let's say in centuries gone by, heresy. You could make your case, and you could try and call on various, for example, theological or philosophical truths to try and say, I think I'm in the right here. But in a relativistic culture now, who actually decides what is moral speech? And by what standard? It seems it's just pure arbitrary power, isn't it, if you're going to try and enforce control of speech in this current relativistic climate?
Well, you either believe in truth or you believe in power. So the difference would be that if you believe in truth, you think it's worthwhile having a conversation. You think it's worthwhile leading evidence to find out what the facts are. You think it's worthwhile having something called public debate because you're trying to find the truth, right?
Yes.
Now, if you don't believe in that kind of objective truth, if you don't believe that we're all submitted to an ultimate truth, if you think that actually people like me just come up with that idea because we want to oppress others and we want to make ourselves ascendant, that all power is self-interested and we're using truth as a power play, well, if you believe that, then you're going to actually treat truth and power the same way. So it's going to become all about power. And so you're going to say his narrative is oppressing people. I have a narrative that's going to oppress him instead. And it just becomes will to power. And so you can imagine how far this goes once you start really, really believing it. It would go as far as to say, well, why would you let someone lead evidence and have a debate and have a contest? That's dangerous because you're giving them an opportunity for their power narrative to oppress others. We need to destroy them. Yeah. And that's the horrible reality that is very slowly starting to dawn, I think, on several Western societies, as we speak.
Israel Folau, you were really at the forefront of that in Australia, and I followed that with interest, and I saw you as someone who was a real champion of the cause, and it wasn't so much his cause, it was the cause of the principle of freedom of expression again. But it seems a lot of people got caught up in the personality and the PR around Israel Folau rather than the principle. Did you find that hard? That people sort of all of a sudden would say, well, I don't really like what he said, so I'm abandoning the fight for the principle here.
Yeah, there was a little bit of that. That was most of the detractors would say things like that. They'd say, oh, that's outrageous. He deserves what he's getting. And I go, yeah, all right. So because somebody said something that somebody strongly disagreed with, because it was an expression of a religious viewpoint, therefore they're going to get cancelled in a most formidable way. I think people forget basic humanity in these circumstances. What you've done is you've taken a man in the prime of his career who lives and breathes sport, and you've said, I will destroy you. I will take away everything you love. I will remove from you everything that makes you tick, and I'll make sure you have nowhere to go. Yeah. Now that, the human toll of that kind of thing is immense, just to say the least. And people lose their basic humanity. They go, oh, yeah, but I disagree. I don't think he was very nice. So, and they move on with their lives. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What happens the day you say something that somebody decides isn't very nice? And this is happening to people who never thought it would happen to them, who are suddenly saying things that the PC set crowd are suddenly saying is that, like, you look at someone like Germaine Greer, a famous, storied feminist of many decades, and all of a sudden she's being cancelled. You see J.K. Rowling. You see how fickle this movement is, and you see the human cost that it can inflict on somebody. And the principle has to be, no, that's not the way we fight. What we want to do is say, oh, Israel Folau said X. Well, I'm going to say Y. I'm going to come out with something a little bit different. I'm going to argue that toss. And I would have preferred it if the media simply had the argument in the public square and talked about it. Or if the NRL, sorry, it's not the NRL, it is the NRL they're talking about now, but it was the Rugby Australia. Gosh,
Yeah.
I've been talking about that for like 2 years. The name just went out of my head. But Rugby Australia, if they just put out a statement saying we disagree strongly with these views, but of course it's a free world, that would have been a far better way to go. The principle was, though, frankly, he paraphrased the Bible, so that means something for Christians. But the broader principle for all of us is, well, you've got to allow people to say things, and you've got to fight back with speech. The cost of doing otherwise is immense, and what you are doing is unconsciously permitting the kind of ideas we just talked about, which is that you're saying, no, it's not about truth, it's about power, and we will destroy people who don't fit our power narrative.
Do you think that the debate, those who are arguing, if you like, for speech controls, it seems to me that they're actually arguing in a very outdated way of thinking. So what I mean by that is you constantly hear slogans like, well, freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences, or it's a private company, they can do what they like. It seems these are actually outdated ways of thinking about the current state of technology and what the public square is now, and how that is just so intertwined with our daily lives, all of us.
Yeah, I think there are also excuses. I think that when people don't want to confront an issue, like you mentioned, one of the things I think you implied there was, say, something like a big tech censorship, and people say, oh, well, it's a private company, Twitter can do what they want, Facebook can do what they want. Well, actually, if they sat and thought about it, they'd realize that Facebook is the public square now. Yeah. Facebook is, it's like going into the public square. And it's a winner-takes-all environment in the big tech scene. So you'll have one platform that absolutely dominates in its space. And there's not going to be another Facebook that does what Facebook does that's really going to get to the levels of popularity or usefulness of Facebook with billions of users. It is the public square. But, of course, if you don't really want to confront the issue, you say, it's a private company, you find an excuse. Yeah. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, look, I also am inclined to say that private companies should, on the whole, be able to have a lot of freedom to do what they want. But I'm seeing something we've never seen before, which is that these private companies now have global influence over the conversation of the public square in a way that is unthinkable. Yeah. I mean, these are... I don't mind when people get rich. I don't mind when there's billionaires out there. But when you look at someone like Jeff Bezos and you look at this mega billionaire, this guy who could become a trillionaire, you sit there and go, okay, that kind of power in one man and his authority over the internet, which is the public square and the stream of communication, this is something different, and we need to think about it. We actually need to revisit it. So some people don't want to go there, and they make up excuses. I think that's the main thing that's going on.
There was some media reports that came out early in February about Israel Folau's teammate, or one of his former fellow teammates, James Maloney, who had bombarded Israel with gay pornography when he first signed up with the Super League club, the Catlins, last year. Now, I was absolutely intrigued by the media coverage of that, and the way certain commentators seemed quite gleeful about that and were almost celebrating that. I can't think of any other person who could get away with that, which is, it seems to me, would clearly constitute sexual harassment in any other workplace and in the Me Too era. But because it was Israel Folau, it seemed there was a double standard there yet again.
Yeah, and you can see what's going on here. It's all about minorities. For example, if somebody, let's say a bloke was to bombard a female athlete with pornographic images, that would not be well received. That would be something he would be shamed for that. And it seems that because somebody's gay, therefore they can bombard. I mean, it's bullying behaviour. Yeah. And they're saying, oh, no, they're the victim group. They can't do wrong. Israel Folau's the oppressor. He's done wrong. That's just a false way to think about it. I mean, the reality is if you're going to be harassing somebody with a relentless bombardment of offensive material, I mean, it would be akin to Israel texting James Maloney every 30 seconds saying, you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you homosexual, you're going to hell, this kind of stuff. Like, that's bullying. It's harassment. It's wrong. You can't do that. But, if James Maloney is to go and look at whatever he wants to in his private life, or he's going to go onto his Instagram and he's going to share gay pride material, fine. It's a free world. Off he goes. He does that. And it's really sad to see the media, almost gloat, as you said, and to say, Israel got what he deserved. No, that's not how these things work. It's not about this power narrative, this oppression narrative. It's going to destroy us.
Well, suddenly you realise at a moment like that, it really is, like you've said, all about power. It's not about principles here, because otherwise they would have applied. Just to wrap this little segment up on free speech, do you think that Christian leaders are now suddenly starting to become a bit more alert to the danger as a result of Israel Folau? Like, if you think about it, if you're a Christian minister, if you can't now quote publicly sections of the New Testament, then we're in a bit of trouble, aren't we?
Yeah, one of the things I've seen is that, amongst the churches, amongst the Christian community, and amongst those in pastoral work, the awareness of this sort of stuff is just always on the increase. And it's increased rapidly. I think Israel Folau was a key moment for many, where they saw what was really going on. Because for those who had a clear head, they were saying, well, what did he do? He spoke about the truth about judgment. He paraphrased a Bible verse. You had Raylene Castle at the tribunal hearing saying if he had posted a page photocopied from the Bible, that would have been hate speech. Yeah. They sort of got the memo on that, some that hadn't before. But also there's been further development since then. There's been things like these conversion therapy laws and stuff. And we are definitely seeing in Australia, and I'm not sure what the situation is in New Zealand, but we're certainly seeing more and more Christian ministers and church communities really waking up to what is going on. There's a denialism that sort of pervades at first, because you think of the way we talked about these issues at the start, about this oppression and power and blah, blah. A lot of people hear that and go, nah, and it's because in their daily life, when they go to the shops and pick the kids up from school and, watch, cartoons in the evening for the kids or the current affairs, they're not upfront and personal with the culture wars. They're not seeing what's going on in the political centres. They're not seeing what the activists are up to. Whereas people like me, that's the world we're in. And I'm always trying to translate and say, guys, this is what's really happening. Hey, this is where it's going. Oh, this is what that's all about, And it's interesting to see so many people now seeing that, because the activism, because the messaging is getting so strong. And there's been key moments like Folau, like conversion therapy, and several others that have really shown it to be true.
Well, yeah, I think we probably naively think that, that's just the world of politics, without ever considering that will come for us sooner or later. You mentioned the anti-conversion therapy bill, as it's been called in Victoria. Well, it's a law now. We have one of those actually proposed for New Zealand as well. There's a big push. The media, everyone is just pushing for this thing. Can you tell us about the harms of this law? Why did you push back against it so hard? Why is this such an issue?
Well, in a nutshell, it's a Trojan horse. It says it's one thing, it's actually another thing. Simple as that. And the thing that really at first made me skeptical when I heard this phrase conversion therapy is that I went, what's that? Because, I've been hanging around conservative Christian churches all my life. And I talk to more Christians in a given week than just about anyone in the country. And I've never heard of it. I've never seen it happening. When you talk about electric shocks and coercion and revulsion therapies and things that are abusive and things that are involuntary and things, you sit there and go, well, hang on, where is that happening? Yeah. Like, if we're going to ban this and make it a criminal offence punishable by 10 years in jail, they must be everywhere. Yeah. And I almost posted on my Facebook, a $100,000 reward for the person who can find me a practicing conversion therapist, because it's really not happening in the Australian community. Yeah. And so you ask, well, what's this really all about? And that's where you find the answers when you really start to look into the detail. And in Victoria, which is the latest state in Australia to pass one of these bills, and it is the worst example in the entire world by far. Yeah.
Look, mate, if from New Zealand, I'd say hold my beer. Our government will probably try and top it.
Believe me, I'm watching. I'm watching. At the moment, it's the worst in the world. Mind you, I'm very uncertain how it could get worse. Maybe they'll just copy and paste.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's why they did it, to set some kind of precedent for others, so that it could be, a world-leading precedent. You look into the detail of that law, and they were very clear in the consultation process that they wanted to attack the ideology behind the law. And you go, okay, what's the ideology behind conversion therapy? And you go, well, what's that? Yeah. It's Christianity. Yeah. And they couldn't be clearer. What it says is that any conduct whatsoever, which is anything, breathing is conduct, which suppresses a person's sexual orientation or gender identity, is potentially criminal. if they report that they suffered harm.
Wow.
And the threshold for harm is very, very low. It can be temporary, it can be psychological. And you imagine, preaching a sermon on Romans 1, that's got to be suppressing someone's sexual orientation or gender identity.
Yeah.
A child coming home from school and saying, Mummy, Daddy, I'm a girl, not a boy. And the parents going, keep the shorts on for now.
Yeah.
We're going to wait. Oh, well, that's suppressing their gender identity. That's punishable.
Yeah.
And so you can think medical professionals, pastors, parents, the incredible number of circumstances, even a code of conduct in a Christian school that says, we believe in boys and girls and we believe this kind of stuff. That's suppressing gender identities.
Yeah,
that's suppressing sexual orientations. It has taken an idea and it has attacked it. And it has said this idea, when expressed in many contexts, as it can be in so many around in so many different ways, could yield a 10-year prison sentence and a $200,000 fine. Now, there are murderers in Victoria that haven't had 10 years in jail. So this is really insane stuff.
My first thought when I heard about it and I looked at what they're proposing in New Zealand is, well, what happened to my body, my choice? What about the person who says, for example, the person who might be experiencing some sort of bisexual attraction says, well, I don't want to act out in a same-sex way and I want a bit of prayer from my local pastor for that. It seems to me that would cover all of those kind of things as well. And all of a sudden, you no longer have the freedom to actually chart your own course, which supposedly was the whole ethos here.
Absolutely, and the bill is very clear that it doesn't matter if the person requests prayer. It actually says prayer is an example of something that could be a criminal offence. It mentions prayer, and it doesn't matter if it's by request. So it's conduct whether or not the person requests it. So an individual could come up to you and say, hey, pray for me. I don't want to be gay. I want to be married to a woman, or, whatever. Pray for my situation. Or, hey, you know what? Do you know other people in my situation who are Christians? If they weren't Christians, they would identify with the LGBT community, but they want to be Christians first and they want to live out their sexuality that way. Who should I talk to? To refer someone to someone else is a criminal offence. And so it goes on. And you can see that there's a group of people who are Christians first, but who may experience the sort of emotions and feelings that go along with same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria, but they're Christians first, and they genuinely want to live out their faith first. And so you do get these groups of people sort of coalescing together to talk to each other about this or have support sessions and so on. Like-minded people, adults, completely voluntary, that sort of thing is totally illegal. And that class of people, which is far more numerous than our politicians dare to admit or look at, that class of persons is effectively erased.
Yeah, I tell you, it's like I said earlier, it's at moments like this you suddenly realise it's that for all the talk of moral relativism and your truth and my truth, we're now all of a sudden we're doing state-mandated moral laws now, and we've effectively got inquisitorial courts going on again.
Yep. And look, the Equal Opportunity Commission of Victoria, they've already said they're going to go around and give education packages to churches and faith communities to inform them what they can and can't say about these issues. I mean, it's insane. This would make the Soviets blush. This is real proper oppression on ideological grounds, and it's not relative anymore, is it? All of a sudden,
no.
Demands enforcement.
Not when Caesar comes knocking and he's asking for more than his taxation, right? It's a bit more than that now. Tell me, how much of a challenge do you find the mainstream media, in the work that you're doing? Because it seems to me that there's still a lot of people today who don't quite understand how lacking in balance and even how unreliable a lot of the mainstream media has now become. Is that a real challenge for you?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It's totally one-sided. It's totally lopsided. They are scrupulous, the mainstream media, about ensuring that they do not get voices on that they don't like. And so you can see, for example, in the last few weeks, the Israel Folau issue has bubbled to the surface again because there was an NRL club that was purportedly interested in signing him. And the media this time, they weren't as silly as last time. They didn't go out to those, Christian groups to get some feedback. They kept it in-house and they did the commentary and they applied the pressure and they got the NRL to fold and to say, no, we won't have him. And they've learned. And I find that they are, very, very, very scrupulous about ensuring that they never even have a conversation with somebody like me, for example, who might go on there and say things they don't like and might say them in such a way that they find themselves unable to rebut. And so it's a constant journey to try and get people to see that the media, I mean, I think Donald Trump was right. They're the most corrupt people in America. I think they're some of the most corrupt people in Australia. And I say that having dealt with them, having sat in the same studios as them, having had conversations with them on camera and off camera.
What I've seen in the last couple of years in particular, there are exceptions that sort of prove the rule, but even a lot of those people I know who are the exceptions, they'll quite happily tell you when the camera's off that they are shocked by the conduct of their fellow colleagues and how sort of almost out of control it's become in the last couple of years anyway here in New Zealand.
Yes. The media is almost a Salem witch hunt. You know, we saw a situation here in Australia, and I'm not a particular fan of the Australian politician Craig Kelly. I'm not a fanboy, but nonetheless, what happened to him was so outrageous because of his comments about COVID-19, vaccines and things like that, most of which was sharing expert opinions, just not the experts who the media like to hear from. They went after him on effectively a Salem witch hunt to say, burn him, destroy him, get rid of him. And in all the coverage of his effectively downfall, just about, I mean, it was a shocking situation, there was not one article, not one comment which actually addressed a single thing that Craig Kelly had ever said.
Yeah.
All they did was say misinformation, conspiracy theories, debunked, blah, 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 blah. They never engaged with a single thing he'd actually said. And that is just, again, it's the power thing that we keep coming back to, just playing out. It's like, no, don't engage with the guy. Don't dare look at the data. Don't dare quote the experts. Just destroy him. Yeah. And that's what we saw. And they are like that.
Speaking of the COVID pandemic, how do you feel about the Christian response to this ongoing challenge of COVID and the way that it's sort of changing the shape of society and very much government influence in our lives? I think here in New Zealand of the example of last year, we had things like last rites were banned for dying people. They banned, obviously church services were banned, but also funerals. We had horror stories. One woman who, the funeral director, I believe it was, opened up a body bag in her driveway of her dead son and said, "This is your last chance to say goodbye," and that was it in the rain. It seems that perhaps the Christian voice was a bit muted at that moment. It should have said, hold on, we accept there's going to be restrictions because we don't know what we're dealing with here, but there's got to be humanity we don't lose in the process of fighting a disease, surely.
Yeah, this has been really difficult, actually, and I appreciate the challenges churches have had, but we've also had the challenge as well politically. Initially, I was like, wow, we're all going to die. I could die from this, pandemic, and well, let's wait and see. I was thinking something like the bubonic plague, but of course, it never was. It was never going to be. So in a couple of months, I was like, okay, this is not what it appears to be. The difficulty, of course, for churches is they were told, could you temporarily suspend your in-person services with your whole church community? And so they had to sit down and go, is that defying God? Is that a we must obey God rather than men moment? And I think that they they pretty much all fell on the ground of, well, no, it doesn't amount to defiance of God. So we can't actually disobey the governing authorities because that command is clear. And, anyway, and I understand why they landed where they landed. And I think that that's fine. However, what I think might have been lacking was that whilst they might have obeyed the government in that respect, they could nonetheless have come out with a much stronger voice in opposition to what was happening. Yeah. And I think that's what was missing. And the reason for that is, I mean, you can look at, for example, in Australia, the thing that's being brought back online first is major sporting events. Yeah. You had 50,000 people in a stadium for a footy game. You've got the Australian Open taking place in, lockdown city, which is Melbourne. You've got major sporting events coming online first. Meanwhile, in the state of New South Wales, churches are still recommended not to sing. Because singing spreads COVID. They haven't had a case there for a month, but anyway, that kind of thing is nuts, and it shows where the soul of a society has gone. Yeah. The church is irrelevant. The church is relegated to the fringes, and there's been a lot of inhumanity inflicted on people because of overzealous regulations and enforcement. Like there was a story of a girl from Canberra where there had been no coronavirus for months. She wasn't allowed to return to Queensland where there was no coronavirus to see her dying father. And it wasn't allowed, and there was a big furor over that, but it's one of many, many, many such cases. So I wish, and I think what's going on here is that the church has fallen for a really big lie. which is that one of the best ways to love our neighbour is through big government.
Yeah, okay.
That is so false.
Yeah.
And they've gone, the government is caring for people. So for us to look caring and nice and loving of neighbour, let's get right behind them. And I'm sitting there going, no, there's a lot more to this picture than that. And basic discernment would tell you what we're becoming through this COVID pandemic, the authoritarianism and politics of leaders, the propagandizing of major firms and Silicon Valley and Facebook and so on, the fearfulness of people just to be sheep herded this way and that way because they are scared, because they don't understand how this is the safest pandemic ever to be unleashed on the world. They don't understand that. Yeah. All those things coming together, there's real problems lying ahead. This is not going to end well. The incredible financial cost to all the countries and what that's going to mean for the future and dealing with future crises, it's all bad. And so the church has fallen for a lie that's going to have consequences, which is big government is one of the best ways to love neighbour. No. The Good Samaritan was the example of neighbour love. He didn't outsource it to others. That was the whole point. He did it himself. And that's what the church should be doing.
Well, there's an irony here too, in that the early church, the early Christians were known, there's historical records of this, for actually running towards plagues and caring for the sick and dying. And not only did that actually save a lot of lives, but apparently the pagan religious leaders came under assault from their own people. They said, well, these Christian priests and their people, they're always helping the sick and the dying. They're making you look bad. And there's this intense pressure around the way the Christians acted in these moments. It seems a little bit of that sort of advocacy for human dignity perhaps has been lost a little bit in this pandemic, it seems to me.
Yeah, and see, back in those days, the church did it themselves. It was Good Samaritan stuff, right? And I think I did a segment on coronavirus right on my program right at the start of the COVID pandemic before we knew. I thought, probably going to be very serious. Yeah. And I told some of those stories where I think one of the plagues in Rome, was it the chief physician, a bloke called Gaius?
Yeah, that's right.
He fled to his house in the country. Yeah. And meanwhile, the Christians, it says they threw themselves into, plague-infested homes and all sorts to care for people and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that's Good Samaritan neighbour love. That's where the rubber hits the road. That's the tough stuff. To sit back and say the government's keeping us safe, all hail the government, let's submit to the government, it really isn't. And so as much as the churches were caught in a hard place to submit to government, and I understand why they did that, I think there was a very good place for them to speak up in key moments.
Well, it's going to be with us too, right, for another 5 years or so, probably. So churches, if we haven't got our act together now, I don't know if we will in 5 years.
Look, seriously, if 0 cases is the requirement, 0, I'm not going to be going overseas for 5 years. That's exactly right.
Yeah. No one leave you home. Right. I was going to segue from coronavirus into Trump presidency. I don't know how you can safely, so let's just jump into this. Tell me, what do you think about the Trump presidency? It's now that we can say that the first term is over for certain. That's all put to bed. It seemed to me there was a lot of false dichotomy from people, and that seems to be a problem in this age where people are like, it's either black or white. You're with me or you're against me, and all that tribalism. And so with Trump, there was no exemption there. It was like you're either for him or you're against him. You weren't allowed almost to form a middle-of-the-road opinion.
Yeah, look, I'm very clear about the fact that I've appreciated a lot of what Trump did, and I really have. I think people are naive in failing to realise what good the Trump administration did in terms of policy work, because it was immense, and also failing to realise what evil they actually resisted. You can think of the pro-choice abortion movement in America and how rabid and how destructive of human life it is. And the way they actually held that back, stood against it, and made pro-life progress was fantastic. You can think of his work on world peace with the brokering of historic peace deals in the Middle East. Probably did more for world peace in that region than just about anyone in 100 years. But of course, doesn't get that recognition. One of the other things I was just reflecting on the other day, there's so many things people don't realize. Like, for example, the Trump administration, I think, actually cracked down on sex trafficking and human slavery in a most incredible way. And the progress they made on that front was just eclipsed all former administrations combined. And the way that they were able to save a lot of people from slavery and imprison lots of traffickers and all the rest of it. And so it goes on. I've done a whole video just listing the things that they achieved. Now, what was the price for that? Well, it was mean tweets. It was caps lock tweets. It was Trump in all his rough edgedness, which I've got to say was fanned, flamed, inflated, and overblown by the media, who hated him. They absolutely hated him. And so the chaos and division that seemed to accompany his presidency was media manufactured or simply falsified. And the good that he achieved was great. So I sit back, I guess, now and I go, it kind of ended a little bit ingloriously. Again, though, totally hyperinflated by press to a point where it's just about not true what they say, and completely devoid of the violence and trouble that America's been having for years, but they didn't bother to cover. But I think, okay, so it kind of ended a bit ingloriously. I'll grant that. And so in 2024, would I like to see Trump back? And part of me initially goes, not really. But then I ask another question. I go, well, who else would do all that he did in terms of actual action, in terms of actual policy? And I go, do you know what? I can't think of anyone, which makes me agree with the assessment of a guy called Victor Davis Hanson, who said Trump was like chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is poison, but it's better than cancer. And in fact, it kills the cancer. And I think that's a pretty great metaphor for Trump. I think that there was something a bit poison about him. I accept that, although I think, again, it's overblown and whatnot. And I'm not going to go down the total Trump bashing line because I think it's been very unfair. But there's something poison about him. But he was killing the cancer. I really think he was. And I think that what we had there was something that is far, far better than a mild-mannered man in Joe Biden, but for all the evil that he and his presidency will achieve.
Do you think that might be his lasting legacy, the Trump presidency, in the sense that it did break open, if you like, the seething corruption and everything else that lay beneath the surface? And now, so people can clearly see the Democrat Party, they're no longer the working man's party. They've got hard left ideologies as their primary interest, it seems, when they're not telling lies about being for the working man. A lot of them are quite wealthy themselves. The Republicans had lost their way, it seems, and never really delivered on a lot of the promises they said they were going to deliver on around pro-life issues. Do you think he broke a lot of that open?
I certainly think he majorly changed the Republican Party to, as you say, be a party that appealed to the working man, that appealed to the middle classes, that appealed to the working classes, that appealed increasingly to migrant communities and new Americans and people who wanted opportunity and all that kind of stuff. It really, really did recast the Republican Party in that sense. And again, I think the Democrats have become a party for the very poor and for the very rich. Yeah. And the Republicans have become the party of everybody in between. And he transformed republicanism in that sense, and he transformed the party. And the Democrats really now appeal primarily to what you would call the globalist class. The people who live in the big cities, New York, Los Angeles, these places, who fly around the world for a living, who exist in sort of rarefied atmospheres of five-star hotels and global, think tanks and summits and all this kind of stuff. And they're consulting for this industry and that industry and working in big business. And they've probably never seen a middle American. They've probably never seen someone from Nebraska for 10 years. And they don't think anybody believes in God anymore. They don't think that anybody has real families anymore. And they're all interested in ideologies like LGBT and, your kids aren't boys or girls, they're whatever they want to be, because firstly, they don't have kids, or they're living in an atmosphere where they've got so much money that the costs of those sorts of destructive ideas don't affect them, because they can use their wealth to cover it over. That's actually become, the mainstay of Democrat support. That's where the money comes from. That's where the influence comes from. But it's almost like that's all they need, because if you've got Amazon, if you've got Facebook, if you've got Twitter, if you've got all the mainstream media channels who are just falling in love with Joe Biden. What was the story the other day? He played Mario Kart with his daughter and won. Likes to put a log on the fire once in a while. I'm like, are you joking?
Yeah,
every time Trump put a log on the fire, it was all about how many people died of coronavirus while he was putting the log on the fire. And
it's so cringy too, isn't it? Trust me, you simpletons, I'm just like you. I enjoy a fine beer on the weekend.
Exactly. It's like, oh, Uncle Joe from Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's kind of like the whole thing that they're trying to portray. But you see how they're just completely sold out to being propagandists.
Yeah.
And that's what the Democrats have. The question is, I guess, and I'll come back to the point, which is that what are the Republicans going to do now?
Yeah,
and I think that's the million-dollar question. Are they going to go back to where they were and say Trump was a mistake and we're not going down that line anymore? We're going back to sort of Mitt Romney Republicanism and that kind of stuff, and we're going to be those who lose graciously, and we're going to appeal more to the bigger business and stuff like that? Or are they going to stay where they are? With the appeal that they've got and the niche that they've got, which means they can really win elections. And also, I love the fact that Trump, I think he really did care about people.
Yeah.
I think the things he did, above all, championed the workers. They championed middle Americans. They championed families. They meant that people who hadn't worked for 3 years got a job, started a business, and couldn't fulfill the orders they were getting. It meant all of this. It meant manufacturing was coming back. It meant oil industry was resurrecting. It was for people, for people, for people. Now, if the Republicans can find a candidate, if not Trump, to carry on that legacy, yeah, it will have changed American politics forever.
Do you think, if you had $1, do you think he'd run again in 2024? Is Trump going to turn up again or not?
I'm sure. I think he will if he can manufacture the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's the big thing. Whether or not they will ultimately succeed in locking him out by deplatforming, etc. And whether they play their cards well on that front, he may not get the opportunity. Yeah. But I think at this stage, he definitely has it in his head. There's no doubt if the opportunity stays.
Well, speaking of locking him out, I think that's what the impeachment was clearly all about, trying to prevent him from running again, because there was no other purpose for it.
But don't you think it backfired a little bit? Because
I did, yeah.
Impeached twice, but also he was exonerated twice.
Yeah, now he gets to swan around like Nero. Look, I won. Yeah, the whole thing was bizarre. And then the moment that they shut it all down was the moment someone suggested they could start calling witnesses from the other side to challenge their account of events. Yes. And all of a sudden, no, we don't want to tell that story.
That's right. We better not go down that line. Yeah. I think honestly, that has not been as positive for the Democrats as they hoped.
No, not at all. Speaking of the Democrats' predictions for Biden's presidency, do you think that he will slow that sort of extreme left beast? It seems that the moderate left were happy to let it out of the cage over the last 4 years because it suited their political purposes. They hated Trump so much they were happy to have the burnings, the riotings, the lootings and everything else. But are they going to be able to contain that now? Can they put it back in the cage, or has it got too out of control? What do you think the Biden presidency is going to be like in that regard?
Yeah, look, I think the Biden presidency is going to have two speeds to it. There will be two lanes, and the one will be the public face, which is Joe Biden's playing Mario Kart with his granddaughter at Camp David. That's one side. And his Uncle Joe from Scranton, who likes to put logs on his fire and has 2 dogs and pats them on the weekend, and that's going to be one side of it.
Yeah.
And we've actually the reason I'm saying this is because we've seen it. Like I'm not speculating here. This is actually what's been happening ever since January the 20th. And then the other side of it is he's signing dozens and dozens of executive actions, and these are executive actions which are restoring international abortion funding, which are just riddled with woke PC, LGBTIQ, critical race theory language, just absolutely riddled with it. These are things which are undoing the Trump era pro-life stuff, the Trump era stuff on gender, the Trump era stuff on the border wall, for example, and also one of the major things that's happened is that it was at the 1776 commission that was set up by the Trump administration, which was basically to change the way the education system operates, to say we need to teach some American values, we need to teach some of the good things about American history, not just critical theory that says it's all an oppressive pile of disaster which needs to be destroyed. That was something the Trump administration did, which was so vital to the survival of America. And that's been dismantled as well. And so you see below the surface, the radical left agenda is happening. It's morally repugnant. It will be quiet. The media won't give it any airtime, because they know that middle Americans won't stand for it, but it will march on. And I think that is the modern Democrat Party. They've just found in themselves a meek and mild figurehead in Joe Biden, who secretly completely supports all of this.
A couple of questions I just want to finish with here. One is critical theory, and you've raised it here already.
Mhm.
How serious a threat do you think that poses to social stability and to freedom in the West? Because I look at it and I am extremely concerned by what it bodes for the future.
Oh, yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think this is really concerning. Basically, the thing about critical theory is it's revolutionary.
Hmm.
It says, okay, we need to wreck the joint. What are we going to wreck? Well, the system. The system is oppressive. The system has systemic sexism and racism and homophobia and all these oppressive structures in it. And it's taught to young people from the point of view of find out your intersectionalities, whatever they are. So, oh, I'm a black woman. All right, great, you're a black woman. Now you need to wage war against the system to liberate your blackness and your womanness.
Yeah.
And so that young person becomes very upset, becomes very miserable, becomes very agitated, and goes out there and wages war as part of the revolutionary movements that are championing this stuff, like Black Lives Matter, like Extinction Rebellion, there'll be a new one tomorrow. They've always got a new one, and it's basically critical theory movements that are there to wreck the joint, and they co-opt these disaffected young people who they've indoctrinated into these movements. Yeah. So what you're going to end up with is movements which continue to be revolutionary and therefore probably increasingly violent, and we're seeing more and more of that, especially in America, increasingly based around riot and disaffection and destruction and just lack of decent behaviour, because they're waging war against the system. And we need to understand something. A massive part of the system is Christianity.
Yes,
that is, in fact, one of the biggest prizes of all, to destroy it, to undo what it believes, and to make sure that that thought is eradicated. And so when I see these young people doing this, and when I see these big umbrella movements having such success and being ignored by governments, apologized for, the left's become apologists for them, yeah. and say, oh, well, they're just doing what you'd expect and we're on their side. And the right is too scared to say a word.
That's right.
Too scared. I mean, our own Prime Minister the other day was asked, are we too woke? And he said, I don't care, because he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to go there. And so you only have one voice in that vacuum chamber. I can see that this, if left unchecked, will be the force that destroys Western societies and destroys Christianity. Well, it can never destroy Christianity, you know what I mean.
I think you're right, and I don't think that's hyperbole. I think there's a seriousness here people haven't quite judged properly. Like, there's a dehumanization that's going on of particular people and groups in society through this ideology, and you look at people. I think perhaps people possibly think it'll burn itself out, or maybe it won't last. But that's not really how these things work. And you look to the example of Germany, right? And what you have is this dehumanizing language, the pseudoscience of eugenics. We've got now the pseudoscience of gender theory and everything else that goes along with it, and critical theory. And then what you have is that Hitler actually delivers to the people what they want, which is prosperity and power, but that wasn't enough. Then the next step came, which they were easily able to execute because the dehumanization had already been embraced widely within society.
Oh, completely. And you see, for example, the government comes out and says conversion therapists, and everyone goes, yeah, Christians, and they're just on board, Yeah. And so there is a real marginalizing of certain groups, which I think is going to lead to very bad places if left unchecked. But I want to tap into something else you said, which is, I was talking to somebody recently who was an older person, and they said, oh, well, young people grow up. And I thought, wow, you don't understand. I mean, you need to talk to more young people, because I'm the generation that got all this at school. Yeah. We were taught about marginalized people and diversity and equity and all this at school, at a Christian school. Yeah. It was, we were taught about climate change and environmentalism, and that's one way in which they get this revolutionary impulse really up and running. We talked all about, bit of critical race theory and oppression and the way all that's bad. That's another way they agitate people and get this revolutionary movement moving. That was all in a Christian curriculum, and it's because older people didn't understand what it was. Yeah. They didn't understand what was going on. They didn't understand what it meant. And now they sit there and go, oh, no, they'll grow up. No. I'm sorry to say you taught them. Yeah. I'm really sorry.
Well, it's also, too, that plenty of people grew up young in Nazi Germany and didn't grow out of that. They grew into it. And once they got power in with the ideology, it got worse.
Completely, and that's really where this is headed, which is that people are. It's getting ahead of steam. It's getting stronger. It's overtaken the political establishments. It's overtaken the activist groups. It's overtaken the media, and young people are just getting channeled into echo chambers where they continue to promote all of this stuff. And as you say, they're growing into it. I think that's exactly right.
Final question. What do you think, if you could just quickly summarise in your mind, what are some of the key challenges you think that now face the Christian church when it comes to politics, the public square in the West, and what might be a fruitful and good response?
Yeah, look, I think the challenge is for them to understand, for Christians to know how that we must engage with the world and we must speak truth and righteousness in the world. And in that sense, and I don't like to use this word because it means different things to different people, but it's a good word, a prophetic voice
yes.
into a changing world, to say, for the church to be a pillar and ground of the truth, as it says in Timothy, and for the church to be that voice of clarity and that voice of reason and that voice to which those who are hungry and thirsty for reality and truth can come. But at the same time, not becoming political, if I could put it that way. It needs to speak into politics. It needs to speak into culture without itself politicizing, because the church needs to have that balance in what it says and that razor-sharp clarity in what it says. But at the same time, it needs to have hold its engagement with culture in tension with the fact that, at the same time, this world isn't our home. We are looking to something future. We have a greater and a brighter hope that lies ahead. And the things we do today matter not just for today, but they matter for eternity as well. So I want the church still to be gospel-centered, gospel-focused, future-oriented, but to understand that if we don't speak truth in this day, then great darkness will come in and there will be far more pain, far more cost, at the expense not just of human life, not just at the expense of good ideas, but at the expense of the ultimate truth of the gospel itself. So we need to get that tension right. And I think that that's what people are wrestling with at the moment. That's the big challenge.
That's brilliant. Well said. I couldn't have put it better myself. And I think your key point about politicisation is essential, that politics is now everywhere. It's so infused in our daily lives. Do you have the right political opinions? If you don't, you're on the outside. And it's a form of tyranny. And we don't want that in the church. We don't want to align ourselves with politics. We align ourselves with something higher,
Correct. But can I say this? We align ourselves with something higher, yes. And there's two ways we can fail to do that. One way is that, I get told sometimes, you're just a conservative. And I don't know whether I'm conservative or what. That's not my game here. My game is to try and tell the truth. But I sort of pick into why people say that. And they go, because there are Christians who are left. And I go, aha. Who is it that's stuck in the political paradigm? You're saying there's left, there's right, we need to include it all. Well, that's one way of being stuck in the political paradigm. Another way is just to become a fanboy for one politician or to support his political cause. So you can have that there's a broad justification that you can use and be politically driven, and there's a narrow justification to be politically driven. It's so important that we don't take our eyes off what Scripture says, what the truth actually is, who Christ is, and we use that as our first foundation. That's the important thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think probably you and I are probably part of, a growing minority of people now who would probably see themselves as almost political dissidents. They don't really have a home. The left is not home. The right is not home, what that's become. There's something more important that's being lost here, right?
100%. 100%. I totally identify with that. And I wish I could take a lot of my detractors and be like, listen to me. You don't understand.
I'm not what you think I am.
That's right. I'm not who you think.
Now give me my banjo and I'll sit on the porch and play my favourite banjo with my 3 fingers. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Hey, Martyn, look, on that note, thank you so much for being here. We resolved the technical issues. We talked about some big issues. And as I said, my viewers have been saying for a long time, look, you've got to have Martyn on the show. You've got to talk to Martyn. So it's been great that we've been able to do this. How do people follow you if they want to follow your thought and the commentary that you're putting out there?
Yeah, sure. I'm on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and email. So I would say go to any one of those, just search Martyn Iles. YouTube's a good one if you want to keep up with the videos. My Facebook is my main platform. Again, Martyn Iles, I've got a blue tick. You'll find me. Otherwise, acl.org.au. Sign up to the mailing list if you want to get our emails. Any one of those channels will get you started.
Martyn, it's been awesome to have you. Thanks so much, mate.
Thank you, Brendan. It's been a pleasure.
When we wake, hear the birds and see the sun. Side by side our fears are done. Oh, the good times just begun. Oh, we know what we have, let's hold on tight. Found what we're looking for in life. Call us crazy, but things are finally right. With you and I, the future